On the first date, what were some immediate red flags that made you not go on a second date? Someone I met through social media who I had a ton of friends in common, but had never met in person asked me out. We decided to meet at Barnes & Noble so we could get coffee and pick out books, both avid readers. He was crazy attractive and smart, and he seemed really into me. I was super excited. So we get there, and within the first 3 minutes, he asks to kiss me. I agreed, and it was instant fireworks. All the tingly feelings. We keep talking and things are going great. But then he proceeds to keep getting continuously more handsy, grabbing my asses, brushing the side of my boobs while his arm was around me, pulling me by my hips into him. And all those things are great once you're a little comfortable with someone, but not at the beginning of a first date. He kept only wanting to make out and wasn't accepting my brush-offs. So 10-20 minutes and I was starting to feel a little icky, and kept saying things like, "Let's just keep getting to know each other." He said something like, "I want to get to know you in the bathroom," and honestly, that can be taken so many ways, but none of them are good. A pickup line involving the word bathroom makes me want to vomit. Eventually, I said I had to get going to work. He tried to convince me to quit my job and stay with him for the day, told me we could go back to his place. When he said something along the line of, "Once we get married, you won't need to work anymore anyway," was out. Nope, no thank you. Told him it wasn't going to work. He got hella angry at me for wasting his time and bolted. By the time I got to my car, he had already deleted me from all social media. I'm still not really sure if he was angry that I didn't want to screw him in the B&N bathroom, didn't want to marry him, or if it was because I had a job. Maybe all three. Probably just because he was a moron. This is quite simple to figure. Of course, he was angry Kosop did not screw him. It had nothing to do with a job or marriage. The guy was obviously horny as fafk and probably did not get laid for a while, so when he met up, he got all kissy and handsy hoping for a quickie. Nope, not happening, as Op was looking to play the long game, so the guy bailed, taking his social accounts with him. The part about her not needing a job after marriage was unnecessary and loathful, but the guy was obviously thinking with his dick at that point. On our first date, he told me he was in med school at the university in the town we lived in. I knew immediately there was no med school, but thought perhaps he was taking his pre-med classes or something, so went on a second date. He had spent an hour telling me how, when he got done with his military service, he had worked as a military contractor doing spy work in Iraq, and if I only knew the things he'd done. We stopped by his apartment to pick something up, and while there I noticed all his mail was in a different name than he had given me. I magically got a text from my work, told him I had an emergency, and had to go immediately into work and handle it. After I told him there wouldn't be a third date, he got spooky angry, and I caught him in the bushes outside my apartment, late at night several times. I eventually had to get a restraining order in the name he gave me. After that, I never saw him again, thank God. I was hit on by a married woman, not my wife though. We talked for about an hour because I wanted to see what her game was. After telling her that I was married, she got really angry at me. I thought, what the fafk? Is there some kind of weird double standard going on here? She got really pissed off when I asked her why it was okay that she was married, but not okay if I am married. I knew someone doing this when she was asking me for advice about it. It completely wrecked our friendship, obviously, but the mindset behind it was the inability to be alone, not trying to excuse it, but ended up asking about it, because I couldn't believe they wouldn't just go through the divorce first. Even though I recommended she start the divorce proceedings first, in this case she has started it then stopped it, because she got cold feet on, she could actually find someone else at least. She wanted to leave her husband on the back burner, just in case it was actually impossible to do better. It's what he had been telling her. Overall, it made me realize they were both not the good people I thought they were. But this is surprisingly common. People dating while trying to divorce. I don't think they seem to realize how unfair it is to the single person. Like, what if they choose not to divorce? Then you're just Saul. Some of them are very sexy and lie. I slept with this woman in my old workplace, who I knew had a fiancé for the longest, but she told me right before a New Year's party through that they broke it off. Next thing I know, after a few weeks of banging, I found out she was still engaged and we stopped sleeping together. She was still a very good friend though. I agree it's very shy for that person to cheat like that. I don't understand how someone could betray the person they're committed to like that. I could never cheat on someone I loved. I was never in a committed relationship when I slept with these women though, and if the only thing keeping someone faithful is me just not letting them have sex with me, I'm not the problem here. I wasn't the first affair for any of these women, and I definitely wasn't the last either. Once she told me that she was married, I just told her I don't date people who are in relationships and left. She was silent. When I got to my car, she had already deleted her profile. I was curious to see if I could find out who her husband is, but couldn't remember her last name. I was planning a first date with this guy years ago, and he suggested bowling. I said it was fine, but I've done it once a few years prior, and I was legitimately terrible at it. The group I was with at the time made it fun regardless of me being totally uncoordinated. He offered to teach me, but I said another time I just wanted to get to know him in a relaxed environment. He suggested we still bowl minus the lessons, and he could also share in the hilarity of my lack of skill. I was down. The night came and the lessons started almost immediately. How to stand, where to stand, everything I'm doing wrong, not taking it seriously. He's trying to teach me, for my own good. He became mean. One smile except when he saw me at the start. I told him this was not the fun or chill night I said I was looking for, and he told me it would be if I took the game more seriously. He was actually angry about the whole night. Somebody asked on the bowling subreddit if bowling was a good first date idea, and I was the only person who loves bowling, mind you, to recommend against it. Even if it's just truly for fun, it's a terrible environment for a first date. Every couple moments someone is getting up from the conversation and isolating themselves in an already loud, expensive, dark, and strange environment. And even good bowlers look weird and awkward bowling. It's a great activity early in a relationship, and certainly long term, but first date. I was cringing so hard for this poor sucker taking dating advice from a bunch of clueless bowling league lifers. Those are good points about it being a poor situation for conversation. That said, I think activities that you're both bad at make for great first dates because of the awkwardness. Instead of it being first date awkward, it's the activity that's awkward. Plus, it lets you gauge the other person's competitiveness, how they handle winning or losing, and you can do some playful trash talk rather than just ask each other questions. I have a buddy like this for video games. Like you play video games with your friends to relax and unwind, right? So we hop on a game, say Minecraft, and instantly, it's all about what he wants to do. He makes us follow him and chop trees for him, give him all our resources just so he can build up the base and call it our base, but then proceeds to make an ender chest, ask for all of our diamonds and puts them in his ender chest and says we need to save them. After about 40 minutes, he wonders why we want to hop off. Dang, your story makes me super grateful for my husband. We went bowling, and I was terrible at it, but he was actually pretty good. Even though I made gutterball after gutterball, he was still cheering me on and recorded videos, or took pics of me saying I looked cute. It made the embarrassment of being bad at bowling dissipate, and I was able to just have fun. Hearing stories like yours make me really appreciate the kind of man he is. I hope you find or have found someone great that doesn't turn a first date into bowling boot camp. He started ranting unprovoked that drunk drivers get punished too severely, and about how it was unfair that he got punished because the prosecutor over his case had a daughter that was killed by a drunk driver, so he was biased. He told me that he had an 8-year-old son at the end of the date, and said you don't have to worry about him, though even though I have 50-50 its custody, I won't go to see him. Looked him up on CaseNet immediately afterwards, and he had felony assault charges. Easiest no to a second date I've ever said. Him and me shared a plate of raw fish. We both ate more of the red fish. He ordered me in a rude way to eat only white fish now. I did and was laughing because I wasn't sure if it was a joke. After 5 pieces of white fish, I went back to the salmon, and he got annoyed and asked me why I did that, and to stick to eating the other type of fish with no explanation. He also ordered me to eat certain side dishes throughout the meal, and I politely declined. After that, I made no effort to keep the conversation that was a bit awkward before from turning sour. He seemed unsure how to fix the situation, and I kept the bad mood until I left. Just why? Why do that? We met up at his place. He was making dinner for me. We were chatting on the couch when he stood up to excuse himself to the restroom. As he was walking away, he turned and mentioned the cameras all over his home, so don't steal anything. Then he pointed to a stack of papers on an end table. I believe in honesty. That's my arrest record. Everything is right there. He went on his way. I considered leaving right then, but didn't. I did pick up that stack of papers. Holy sh*t. His arrest record was several pages long and spanned 3 states. Most of the arrests were for domestic violence. There were a couple involving weapons, some minor drug charges, and assault charges. He returned, and thank God my phone rang. I answered it even though I didn't recognize the number, had no idea who it was. I made like it was one of my daughters, and she needed to be picked up from somewhere immediately. I'll never know who was actually on the other end of that call, but I left this guy's home and never looked back. I will admit I casually ignored some red flags before our date. But the camera tale, I don't believe for a minute he had cameras everywhere, and the criminal history wouldn't allow me to ignore what I already felt. He got arrested for shoplifting right in front of me. I really wish I was making the story up, Lamau. He didn't shoplift in front of me, just got arrested. I was probably about 19/20 and incredibly naive at the time. I am 30 now. I had known him for a few weeks, and we decided to go out on a dinner date. We were on our way to dinner. I drove, and he wanted to stop to make a return at GameStop. I thought, yeah, okay, no problem. Well, turns out, he actually went in to quickly shoplift about $500 worth of sh*t. Mind you, I thought he was making a return, so I stayed in my car the whole time he was stealing. I'm assuming the employee of the store watched him walk back to my car, because within a minute a cop pulls up next to us and taps on my passenger window. The cop asked him for his driver's license and went to run it. I asked him, "What the faff did you do?" And this dumbass goes, "Oh, I have unpaid parking tickets." While cop number 1 is running his information, an unmarked car pulls up next to my side of the car, and a second cop or detective pulls me out of the car and starts interrogating me. He must have assumed I was in on it and this idiot's getaway driver or something. I turn around to see him getting pulled out of the car and cuffed. The cops were super nice to me because I was honest and cooperative, and they could tell I had absolutely no clue what was going on, so they let me go home. I had no idea WF he really got arrested for until I looked at our local jail intake website. Turns out, he had shoplifted $500 worth of stuff from GameStop and had like 3 outstanding warrants for assault charges. Dodged a serious bullet there. He stared at his phone the whole time. Then after we parted, he sent a text complimenting my @S's and then said we should go out again. I had a very similar bad date once. She just kept looking her phone the whole time. I tried to make some conversation at first, but since she was clearly not interested to even be present, I just drank my coffee, told her I'm no longer interested either, and went home. No @S's compliments though, sadly, but she didn't take the rejection, if you can even call it that, too well, so I had to block her afterwards. I can kind of understand people who are shy, super nervous, and as a consequence have not encountered rejection before and have trouble handling it. Phone probably offers them a partial escape from an awkward situation, but they definitely should have enough self-awareness to understand this level of avoidance is a big personal problem and should be fixed before doing any serious dating. Also, if there is absolutely no connection, because they are not even fully present in the date, there is simply no way anything could develop from it anyway. Lamau, this one time I got a match, and she was like, "Hey, my friend is really into you," and told me to ask for your snap. Gave her my snap, proceed to set up a date with said friend. I pick her up, and she's on her phone the entire ride to the restaurant. We get there and start eating, and she's still on her phone the whole time. Then her phone died. She immediately turned to me and said, "Oh, my phone died, can I log into my snap on yours?" Met up with this guy from Tinder. After talking for a bit and having a coffee, he was like, "Want to meet my kid?" I felt totally put on the spot, and although I was clearly uncomfortable, I panicked and said I would. We went back to his place, and I met the kid. She was actually pretty cool. Then he sent her off to bed and proceeded to tell me that the mother of his child randomly dropped dead in their kitchen one day, and now his kid didn't have a mom. I looked around his place, and there were pictures of said dead mom everywhere. I told him it was getting late, and I was going to get going. Before I left, he asked if he could stroke my stomach and pinch my ass. It was a very specific and super odd request. I said no. The next day, he sent me a text asking me if I would babysit his kid. Not even asking me on a second date, just asking for childcare. She brought her toddler. No big deal, I have kids too, I get it. She wanted to shop for outfit for her kid because she was doing a Christmas card family portrait later that week. Bit uncomfortable, but hanging out shopping? Sure, why not? Then she started holding up clothes to me, because I was about the same size as her ex and he was going to be in the portrait too, even though he's her ex, because you know the kid, and then asked if I would try things on so she'd know how they would look on her ex. I walked off to find the fitting room but found my car instead, and was very glad we drove separately, and I wasn't leaving her stranded. It made me cancel the first date we had planned. I met a guy on a dating site and he asked me on a date and I agreed. Later I got a call from work saying a package had been delivered. It was a huge bouquet of flowers. I was so confused. I asked him if he had sent them, and he said, "I did. You said you had a bad day last Friday, so I wanted to make this Friday a good one for you." Normally, I would absolutely love this gesture and be over the moon with this. The only problem is that I never told him where I worked, and I had told him I lived in a large city an hour away to be on the safe side. So not only did he find my true town, but also found out where I had worked. Instant red flag and made me terrified. Fortunately for me, he did stop. He found a new obsession, which I found out later. The letter itself expressed how sorry he was for missing my last day at work. Essentially, I was leaving the restaurant to go back to school, a school far enough away that I could no longer work there. This kid was about my age, quiet, and often came in alone to do his own schoolwork. I was nice to him, he seemed like a nice kid, but I guess he thought it was something more because he was absolutely gutted that he had missed my last day by mistake, and knew I wanted him to be there. It was almost a whole page long, so he must have said other stuff. But that was the part that made my skin crawl because he placed so much more significance on our interactions than I did, and I had no idea. It was very scary because it felt like this kid had constructed this whole non-existent relationship between us in his head. I was just being nice, and he was under the impression that we were close enough for me to want him to be there for my last day, when I would argue we'd barely even ever had a full conversation. Anyway, I went back to the restaurant on breaks, and he had moved on to another server, this time a server married with kids. In retrospect, I think he was probably harmless, but it was scary because at the time I didn't know how far he would take things. I once went on a first date with a guy who was clearly not over his ex. He spent the entire time talking about her, comparing me to her, and even showing me pictures of them together. It was a huge red flag for me, and made it clear that he wasn't ready for a new relationship. Needless to say, I didn't go on a second date with him. I went on a date with a guy who called himself a mama's boy, and said no woman would ever compare to his mother. There was no second date, and despite how many times I turned him down and said I wasn't interested, he kept calling and texting me for 2 years until I changed my number. He brought his 2-year-old along on our date. He then informed me he would be okay with me going out and partying for maybe 1 more year to get it out of my system, but after that, he expected me to settle down. Then went on a strange rant about how important it is for women to have their fun before becoming moms so they are ready to be homemakers. I was 19 and also was not aware he even had a kid beforehand. This made me very curious, so I looked the guy up on Facebook. He's now on his 3rd marriage. No more kids. The toddler I met is now almost 10 times isn't real. I feel very strange about this. Hopefully this wife got all of her partying out of her system. At dinner, he shared with me that he didn't believe in washing his hands after going to the bathroom as long as toilet paper was used effectively. Hand washing was obsolete. He said all of this while licking his fingers and digging into a shared basket of appetizers. I was disgusted. Met at a work function and also had mutual friends. We were in college at the time, way before COVID, and the topic came up because I pulled out a small bottle of hand sanitizer to use. He asked me why I used sanitizer. That's what started this conversation. And no, he was not joking or being sarcastic. He had a lot of quirky opinions. Yes, it was our first and last date, but we stayed friends and eventually lost touch. We are still Facebook friends. Yes, I stopped eating at that point. Not another bite. Haha. Met a stranger at the grocery store and he asked me out for dinner. Dinner didn't go very well. He spent most of the date insulting me for being a vegetarian, and at the end of the night, when we were walking back to our cars and saying bye, he asked if he could have a kiss. I said no. He asked again. I said no. He said how about a peck on the cheek, so I go to do that, and he turns and kisses my mouth quickly. Definitely knew there would be no second date after that. I ignored all future texts. His last one said, "Why does this always happen to me? I feel like I literally dated this guy." He spent all of dinner rolling his eyes every time I took a sip from my white wine because alcohol is poison, and telling me everything I liked was stupid and wrong. I stupidly let him drive me home, but in a stroke of genius, didn't open the gate for him, and instead got out of the car before we were on the property. He got out of the car too, then started trying to fully make out with me and asked to come in for a nightcap. I said, "I thought you don't drink." And he said, "Just a coffee or tea, whatever." I slipped through the gate and slammed it behind me, and he was still stood out there when I let myself into my front door. He texted the next day to tell me he'd had a great time and maybe we could just watch movies at mine next time. It was like a horror movie. Not entirely red flags, but just some small world things that made that first date the last one. For context, before the date, I picked him up. He was in a wheelchair. He lost his leg in a motorcycle accident a few years back and had recently had surgery on his leg because of bone spurs. He normally has a prosthetic. We went out for breakfast. Everything seemed fine, no major issues with him. When it came time to pay, his card was declined. He called his dad, who was also his boss, to figure out why his paycheck hadn't been deposited. Conversation went back and forth, and I ended up paying, and he promised to pay me back. It totally wasn't a big deal, it happens, I get it. So we get back to my car, and he made a comment about the last time he was around a RAV4. It was his motorcycle accident. He hit into one that was pulling out of a restaurant, and forth, and I ended up paying, and he promised to pay me back. It totally wasn't a big deal, it happens, I get it. So we get back to my car, and he made a comment about the last time he was around a RAV4. It was his motorcycle accident. He hit into one that was pulling out of a restaurant where it happened and such. Long story short, it was my aunt who was driving the car that pulled out of the restaurant and he hit into. He was currently in the process of suing her because of it, despite the fact that he was going almost double the speed limit at the time and didn't even have his license. Needless to say, there was no second date, and he never did pay me back for breakfast. Another great when I went on a date with the Korean-American guy in college. It was really lovely. Until his mother called during our coffee date. She asked him what my name was, and he told her first and last. He got a sad look on his face and stood up apologizing profusely for wasting my time. He said, "I am so sorry, I should have had her look you up before the date." Super confused, I looked at him and asked, "What are you talking about?" Apparently he didn't realize my name was Japanese American and biracial but white passing, and his mother saw my Facebook pef at the time was me and my family at the Obon festival hosted by the Buddhist temple and Japanese American society in my city. So he left the date because his mommy told him he couldn't date a Japanese girl. Had a similar thing happen to me in high school. I'd gone to a dance and been spending a lot of time with this girl when she suddenly tells me her mom said we couldn't date. Turns out her mom had an affair 16 years prior. This girl and her older brother were the result. Mom's old husband had a vasectomy and got suspicious by the time the second miracle baby came along. My dad was a lawyer and represented this lady's first snipped husband because he was a family friend and took her to the cleaners. Heard through the grapevine that she didn't tell her kids born of cheating or cuckolding the sordid circumstances of their birth, and she was terrified I knew and would tell. Also, she was still really mad at my dad for the legal reaming he gave her 16 years prior. She was 8 months pregnant when I showed up. something all pictures and conversations had managed to omit. We still went out because I wasn't about to be shy to a single pregnant woman, but I really should not have. She was an off her meds, extremely depressed pregnant woman with suicidal ideation who proclaimed her undying and eternal love for me by hour one. Just a fun little side note, she was kinda short, and so was her dad, who I did get to meet. And the whole house they lived in on this farm was built to their height. I'm 6 feet, and I felt like Gandalf visiting Bilbo.